Thank you for clicking in this video. In this gripping tale of survival, trust is shattered, fear takes hold, and escaping the shadows may be the only way to stay alive.
The city of New York had never been silent like this. Ben stood in his apartment, feeling the oppressive quiet, almost like a physical weight pressing down on him. The distant wail of sirens and hum of traffic that once defined the cityscape had been replaced by a chilling void. The silence was so profound that even the whisper of the wind seemed amplified, carrying with it the echoes of a world gone silent. Ben's heart raced with every soft noise he made, each creak of the floorboards, each rustle of fabric, a reminder of how precariously thin his thread of survival was. The virus had begun innocuously enough, a new strain of the flu that seemed to spread quickly. But it soon revealed its horrific nature. Those infected were not just unwell, they transformed into creatures driven by an insatiable hunger for sound. The virus had taken away the humans they once were, leaving behind only primal entities that reacted to any noise with a terrifying speed and aggression. The city, once teeming with life, had become a labyrinth of death, with every corner potentially harboring the infected. Ben's apartment, once a sanctuary, had become a prison. He had barricaded the windows and doors, using anything he could find to ensure that not even the faintest sound would escape. His only contact with the outside world was through a small crack in the boarded-up window, where he could catch glimpses of the chaos unfolding below. The streets, now a field of ruin, were littered with abandoned cars and debris, their silence occasionally shattered by the sudden, piercing cries of the infected. Days turned into weeks, and the fear of the unknown became a constant companion. The world outside was a stark contrast to the eerie quiet within his walls. Ben had learned to navigate his apartment in total silence, his movements deliberate and calculated. Even the smallest sounds, like the clinking of dishes or the rustling of his coat, were a potential death sentence. The fear of making a mistake, of inadvertently drawing attention, gnawed at him constantly. One evening, as he was scanning the sparse contents of his kitchen cupboard, Ben noticed a flicker of movement from the corner of his eye. He froze, his heart hammering against his ribcage. A shadow had passed by the small crack in the boarded-up window. For a moment, he thought he might be imagining things. The darkness outside was thick and impenetrable, but the silhouette of a figure moving below was unmistakable. Terror and hope warred within him. Could it be another survivor? Or was it a trap, an infected one attempting to lure him out? The thought of another person, another soul in this desolate world, sparked a flicker of hope. But the fear of being deceived and attracting the infected was too great. He decided to investigate, moving cautiously towards the window. His breath caught in his throat as he carefully pried a board loose, peering through the narrow gap. The figure was still there, moving cautiously along the street, making no sound. Ben's pulse quickened. He needed to make a decision quickly. Was it worth the risk to find out if this person was a potential ally or a deadly distraction? The possibility of connecting with another human being was tantalizing, but the danger of discovery was real. With a mixture of fear and determination, Ben decided to investigate further. He moved silently through his apartment, gathering what little supplies he had left. Every noise was amplified in the silence, each movement a calculated risk. He made his way to the door, carefully unblocking it and slipping outside into the darkness. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sounds his own footsteps and the distant, haunting cries of the infected. As he moved closer to the figure, he noticed that they were huddled near an old, dilapidated bookstore. The building seemed to be in better condition than the surrounding structures, and a faint light flickered from inside. Ben's hope surged again. The bookstore could provide shelter, resources, or even answers about what had happened to the world. But as he drew closer, the sense of unease grew. Why was the figure there, and what had driven them to this place? He approached cautiously, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. The infected were known to be drawn to sound, but the bookstore's light suggested that someone had been there recently. The figure inside appeared to be a young woman, her movements hesitant and fearful. Ben's heart ached at the sight of her vulnerability. He wanted to help, to offer her some semblance of safety in a world that had lost all semblance of normalcy. Finally, he gathered the courage to approach the door of the bookstore. He knocked softly, hoping that his presence wouldn't attract unwanted attention. The woman's reaction was immediate. She froze, her eyes wide with terror as she glanced towards the door. Ben could see the fear in her eyes, a reflection of his own. As the door creaked open, Ben held his breath, hoping that this encounter wouldn't be the end of him. The woman, who introduced herself as Emily, looked as if she had been through hell and back. Her clothes were tattered, her face streaked with grime, and her eyes held a haunted look that spoke of countless nights spent in fear. She quickly explained that she had been hiding in the bookstore for days, barely escaping the infected that had discovered her hiding place. Ben's instincts told him to be cautious, but the desperation in Emily's eyes was palpable. He welcomed her inside, knowing that the decision to help her could either be his salvation or his undoing. The bookstore's interior was dimly lit by a few candles, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The silence inside was almost comforting compared to the chaos outside. Ben and Emily exchanged stories in hushed tones, their voices barely above a whisper. Emily spoke of her experiences, her voice trembling as she recounted her narrow escapes and the growing sense of hopelessness that had settled over her. Ben listened intently, the gravity of their situation becoming clearer with each word. The infected were evolving, becoming more adept at tracking their prey, and their chances of survival were diminishing rapidly. As the days passed, Ben and Emily developed a tentative routine. They moved through the bookstore with extreme care, their footsteps as silent as possible. They scavenged for supplies, their every action measured and deliberate. The infected outside remained a constant threat, their presence a grim reminder of the world they had lost. Despite their efforts, the tension between them was palpable. The silence of the bookstore was a double-edged sword, providing safety while also heightening the sense of isolation. Ben found himself constantly on edge, the fear of making a mistake or drawing unwanted attention always lurking in the back of his mind. Emily, too, seemed to be struggling with the weight of their situation, her eyes often distant and lost in thought. One night, as they sat together in the dim light of the bookstore, Emily's voice broke the silence. "Ben, do you think there's a way out of this? Is there anywhere we can go where we might be safe?" Ben's heart ached at her words. He wanted to offer her hope, to believe that there was a place where they could find safety and refuge. But the reality of their situation was harsh and unforgiving. The city was a labyrinth of danger, and every attempt to leave had ended in failure. Still, he couldn't bring himself to crush the flicker of hope in Emily's eyes. "There might be," Ben said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We just have to keep looking, keep hoping." Emily nodded, though her expression remained troubled. The silence of the bookstore seemed to press down on them, a constant reminder of the world they had lost and the dangers that lurked just beyond the walls. Ben and Emily had settled into a fragile routine within the bookstore, but their fragile sanctuary was about to be shattered. Each day began with a silent scavenging trip into the city, their movements carefully orchestrated to avoid drawing attention. They moved through the darkened streets, their senses heightened, each rustle of leaves or distant creak of metal sending shivers down their spines. The silent, oppressive atmosphere seemed to close in on them, amplifying their fear and uncertainty. One evening, as they returned from a particularly nerve-wracking scavenging trip, Ben noticed a new element in the air. The once constant cries of the infected had grown fainter, replaced by a new, unnerving quiet. It was as though the world outside was holding its breath, a prelude to something far more ominous. The silence was unnaturally deep, and Ben couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Emily, too, sensed the change. Her eyes were constantly scanning the darkness, her body tense with apprehension. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's too quiet." Ben nodded, his own unease mirrored in her expression. The silence seemed to be closing in, growing more intense with each passing moment. They moved quickly through the bookstore, their eyes darting nervously to the windows and doors. It was clear that their sanctuary was no longer as safe as it had once seemed. As the night wore on, the sense of dread grew stronger. Ben and Emily huddled together in the dim light of a single candle, their conversations reduced to terse, anxious exchanges. The oppressive quiet made every small sound, every creak of the building or shift of fabric, seem louder and more threatening. The sense of isolation was overwhelming, each passing hour feeling like a slow descent into madness. The next morning, Ben discovered a new sign of the outside world's peril. The once abandoned streets were now littered with strange markings, symbols scrawled on the walls and sidewalks, their meanings inscrutable but clearly deliberate. The symbols seemed to be a form of communication, a message from someone or something, and their presence was deeply unsettling. Emily, her face pale with fear, examined the symbols with growing anxiety. "What do you think they mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Who could have done this?" Ben shook his head, his own sense of dread deepening. "I don't know, but it doesn't look good. We need to be extra cautious." They decided to investigate further, hoping to uncover more about the symbols and their significance. As they ventured deeper into the city, they noticed that the infected seemed to be more agitated than usual. Their cries were more erratic, and their movements appeared more frantic. It was as if something had disturbed their routine, driving them into a frenzy. Ben and Emily took refuge in an abandoned library, hoping it would provide some answers. Inside, they found scattered newspapers and old books, their contents mostly irrelevant but occasionally hinting at the chaos outside. One newspaper article, dated just before the outbreak, mentioned a group of researchers working on a new form of sound-based communication. The article was incomplete, but it hinted at the possibility of a sinister agenda behind the research. As they read the article, Emily's face grew more troubled. "Do you think this could be related? What if the symbols are a part of whatever they were working on?" Ben considered the possibility. "It's hard to say. But whatever it is, it's clear that the situation is getting worse." Their fears were confirmed later that evening when they heard a series of loud, discordant noises echoing through the city. The sounds were unlike anything they had heard before, a cacophony of distorted frequencies that seemed to come from multiple directions. The infected reacted violently to the noise, their cries merging into a terrifying chorus of chaos. The noise was so intense that Ben and Emily were forced to retreat to the basement of the library, where they hoped to find some protection from the onslaught. The basement was dark and musty, but it offered a temporary respite from the horrors above. They huddled together, their hearts racing as the sounds of destruction reverberated through the building. As they waited in the darkness, Emily's anxiety reached a breaking point. "Ben, we can't stay here forever. We need to find out what's causing this and stop it." Ben nodded, understanding the urgency of her words. "I agree. But we need to be careful. If the infected are being drawn to the noise, we need to find a way to avoid it. They decided to venture out the following day, hoping to locate the source of the disturbing sounds. The city was even more chaotic than before, with the infected swarming the streets in greater numbers. Ben and Emily navigated the treacherous terrain, their senses on high alert. They had to move quickly and silently, avoiding the infected as they searched for answers. Their search led them to an abandoned research facility on the outskirts of the city. The facility had been ravaged by the outbreak, but there were still signs of recent activity. The walls were covered in the same symbols they had seen earlier, and there were scattered notes and documents that hinted at the facility's research. Among the documents, Ben found a detailed report on the sound-based communication project. The research aimed to create a new form of communication using sound frequencies, but it had gone awry, leading to the outbreak of the virus. The report suggested that the infected were not just drawn to sound, but were being manipulated by it, their behavior controlled by the frequencies. The revelation was both horrifying and enlightening. The infected were not just mindless creatures driven by instinct, they were being influenced by an external force. The realization of this manipulation deepened the sense of dread, but it also provided a glimmer of hope. If they could find a way to disrupt the frequencies, they might be able to regain some control over the situation. Ben and Emily returned to the bookstore, their minds reeling from the discoveries they had made. They knew that their survival depended on their ability to understand and counteract the forces at play. The silence that had once been their greatest ally was now a fragile veneer masking a deeper, more insidious threat. As the days passed, the tension between Ben and Emily grew. The silence that had once felt like a shield now seemed like a prison, trapping them in a world of constant fear and uncertainty. The infected continued to swarm the city, their presence a constant reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond the walls. The sense of impending doom grew as Ben and Emily made their preparations. Their sanctuary had become a place of mounting anxiety, each creak of the bookstore's old wooden floors a reminder of the dangers that lay beyond its walls. The silence that once shielded them now felt like a cruel joke, an eerie calm that preceded the chaos they could sense brewing outside. In their quest for answers, they had uncovered disturbing truths about the virus and its origins. The research facility's documents had painted a chilling picture of a world where sound was both a weapon and a weakness. The infected were not merely drawn to noise, they were controlled and manipulated by it, their actions guided by frequencies beyond ordinary human perception. With this knowledge in mind, Ben and Emily devised a plan to disrupt the sound frequencies that influenced the infected. They gathered the remaining equipment from the research facility, including sound generators and frequency modulators. Their goal was to create a device that could interfere with the virus's control mechanisms and hopefully reduce the infected's aggression. Their efforts were fraught with challenges. The equipment was old and in disrepair, and their attempts to repair and calibrate it were often met with frustration. Each day brought new obstacles, and their nerves were frayed by the constant threat of detection. The infected were growing more restless, their cries becoming more frequent and erratic. One night, as they worked in the dim light of the bookstore's basement, a sudden and horrifying realization struck them. The symbols they had seen in the city were not just random markings, they were a form of communication, a code that the infected were using to coordinate their actions. The realization added a new layer of complexity to their already daunting task. If they were to succeed, they would need to not only disrupt the frequencies but also decode the symbols and understand their purpose. Ben and Emily worked tirelessly, their days blending into a haze of exhaustion and fear. Their only respite came in brief moments of quiet, where they would share their thoughts and fears in whispered conversations. The weight of their isolation was palpable, each day a struggle against the ever-present threat of discovery. On the third night of their efforts, they successfully activated the makeshift device. It emitted a low-frequency hum that resonated through the air, a sound that was both alien and unsettling. Ben and Emily held their breath, waiting for any sign of change. The first signs were subtle. The infected's cries grew quieter, their movements less erratic. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the device was working. But just as hope began to take hold, the situation took a dramatic turn. The silence that had enveloped the city was shattered by a new and even more disturbing noise, a high-pitched, piercing shriek that seemed to come from every direction. The infected responded with a frenzy, their cries merging into a cacophony of chaos that threatened to overwhelm everything. Ben and Emily realized with growing horror that their device had inadvertently triggered a new phase in the infected's behavior. The frequencies they had disrupted had unleashed a more aggressive and unpredictable response. The infected were now reacting with an intensity that was both terrifying and uncontrollable. Desperate to salvage their plan, Ben and Emily fought to regain control over the device. They made adjustments, hoping to reverse the effects and restore some semblance of order. But their efforts were met with limited success. The infected's behavior remained erratic, and the city was plunged into a state of unprecedented chaos. In the midst of the turmoil, Ben and Emily made a harrowing discovery. The research facility's documents contained a final, chilling revelation. The virus had been designed not only to control the infected, but also to evolve in response to external stimuli. The frequencies they had attempted to disrupt were only one part of a larger, more complex system. The virus was capable of adapting and evolving, rendering their efforts to counteract it increasingly futile. As the infected surged through the city, Ben and Emily faced a dire choice. They could continue their futile attempts to control the virus or escape while they still had the chance. The bookstore, once their sanctuary, had become a trap from which there was no escape. The silence they had relied on for protection was now a prison, and the threat of discovery was ever present. With heavy hearts, they decided to leave the bookstore behind and venture into the chaos that engulfed the city. Their journey was fraught with danger as they navigated the streets, now teeming with the infected in a state of frenzy. The world they had once known was unrecognizable, and their hope for survival seemed to dwindle with each passing moment. Their escape led them to an unexpected and unsettling encounter. In a deserted alley, they stumbled upon a hidden underground facility. Inside, they found a group of survivors who had been working in secret to develop a cure for the virus. The facility was filled with advanced technology and research materials, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The leader of the group, a scientist named Dr. Lydia Hart, welcomed them with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Dr. Hart explained that the research facility had been working on a potential cure for the virus, but progress had been slow due to the escalating chaos. The survivors had managed to keep their work hidden from the infected, but their situation was growing more precarious. Ben and Emily joined forces with Dr. Hart and her team, contributing their knowledge and experience to the ongoing research. The combined efforts brought a glimmer of hope as they worked to develop a viable cure. The process was slow and fraught with challenges, but the determination of the survivors and the critical nature of their work kept them focused. The final twist in their harrowing journey came as the research reached a crucial stage. The team discovered that the virus was not just a biological entity, but had also been altered by external influences. The symbols and frequencies they had encountered were part of a larger, more elaborate scheme orchestrated by a shadowy organization seeking to harness the virus for their own purposes. The revelation shook Ben and Emily to their core. The virus was not merely a catastrophe, but a carefully engineered tool of manipulation. The organization behind it had sought to control and exploit the chaos for their own gain. The discovery added a new layer of urgency to their mission, as they realized that their fight was not just for survival, but for the future of humanity. In the final moments of their ordeal, Ben and Emily faced the ultimate challenge. The cure was nearly ready, but the infected's aggression had reached unprecedented levels. The city was on the brink of complete collapse, and the survivors faced a race against time to distribute the cure and prevent total annihilation. As they prepared for the final push, Ben and Emily found solace in each other's strength. Their journey had been marked by fear and uncertainty, but their resilience and determination had carried them through. The final confrontation was both a physical and emotional battle, a testament to their courage and resolve. In a dramatic and unexpected twist, the true nature of the virus and its origins was revealed. The shadowy organization behind the outbreak had been manipulating events from the shadows, orchestrating the chaos for their own ends. The cure was not just a solution, but a key to unraveling the conspiracy and restoring some semblance of order to a fractured world. As the city began to recover from the devastation, Ben and Emily emerged as symbols of hope and resilience. Their journey had been marked by incredible challenges and sacrifices, but their unwavering determination had led them to a crucial turning point. The final moments of their story were both triumphant and bittersweet, a reminder of the power of courage and the enduring strength of the human spirit. In the final lines of the story, Ben and Emily stood together amidst the ruins of the city, their gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a new light on a world scarred by chaos and fear. As they looked out over the city, they realized that their struggle had not been in vain. The future was uncertain, but the promise of a new beginning shone through the darkness.
If you want to watch another story, there is another video appearing on your screen now. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more spine-chilling stories.